from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, full access. Moments from now, two members of Congress, Republican Tom Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna, are set to brief the public on what they saw in their review of unredacted Epstein files today at the Department of Justice. Also across the pond, this Epstein scandal having a ripple effect through British politics. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who never met Epstein, is now fighting for his political survival. And meet me in Beijing. Days after an excellent call, President Trump and Xi Jinping are now expected to meet face-to-face the first week of April. That meeting coming as China moves to rein in U.S. Treasury holdings, and global markets are watching closely. Plus, another shutdown? Absolutely. Congress has just 4 days to cut a deal or risk a partial shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. One senator says it's all but certain. Can Congress find a fix in time? We begin with another Epstein file inflection point gripping Washington. Members of Congress right now are visiting an office inside the Justice Department in which they are able to privately review the Epstein files the DOJ has so far made public unredacted. No electronic devices are allowed, with Trump critics like Representatives Tom Massie and Ro Khanna taking to social media to claim justice for the victims before heading to the DOJ. Both are expected to speak before cameras and microphones following their reviews. Again, no electronic devices. They can only take notes on what they see. And the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, spoke to reporters shortly after making his own visit to the DOJ a few hours ago. Let's listen.
Of the 3.5 million documents that have been released, I probably had the opportunity to review maybe 30 or 40 of them. Okay, so this is going to be an extremely time-consuming and painstaking process. There is no way before Attorney General Bondi arrives on Wednesday that we're going to have the opportunity to go through every redaction in order to ask thorough questions.
Congressman Raskin's comments coming right after Epstein co-conspirator Ghislaine Maxwell testified virtually before Congress, pleading the Fifth and not taking any questions. This, as British Prime Minister Keir Starmer jetted off to a crisis meeting with Labour Parliament members amid mounting calls for his resignation. This is a fast-moving story, and we're going to be covering throughout the evening. Joining us now with the latest live from the White House is Bloomberg's Jeff Mason. Jeff, it's great to have you back with us on the program. It's clear, according to Raskin, and we have yet to hear from Khanna and Massie, that this could be a very slow and drawn-out process, which I presume is politically not what this White House needs.
No, Joe, it's exactly the opposite of what this White House wants. You've heard President Trump say repeatedly that he thinks it's time for the country to move on, but his own party isn't moving on. Certainly the Capitol Hill is not moving on, and this story isn't going anywhere. At the same time, the president and his people want him to be focusing on the economy. He's got the China visit that you mentioned earlier coming up, and yet Epstein, which has been a thorn in his side for months, just keeps coming back to bite him.
Well, that's for sure. Have we heard anything from the White House about the slow roll here? Obviously, they're violating the law every day that goes by without all of these documents released, and I believe there are millions left to be released. The DOJ says will never go public.
Yeah, nothing new or particularly fresh from the White House on that today that I've seen. But I can tell you that in general, just going back to your first question, they'd like this to go away, and the president himself has been very vocal about that. But it is it's not just a political thorn in his side. It is an issue that just keeps coming up with more negative dividends for him and for everyone who's connected to Epstein. And we've seen that with Britain and the prime minister there as well, and the business community in the United States and business leaders as well.
Yet with all of the political risk that has brought to this administration, and there have been a growing number of calls, for instance, for Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick to resign based on his name emerging here in the files. It's taken on a whole different urgency overseas, Jeff, where now Keir Starmer is fighting for his political career. We heard about that from Jamie Raskin earlier today. Listen.
It's a huge scandal in England right now, going all the way to the Prime Minister, and his name is not mentioned anywhere in the Epstein files, unlike Donald Trump's. But they had sent someone over here to America who got involved with Epstein, and it is absolutely rocking British politics. And this is something that the whole country, regardless of your political party or beliefs, has got to pay attention to.
Jeff, how do we rationalize this, knowing that Donald Trump, Howard Lutnick, and others have not been directly accused of wrongdoing? How is it a politician whose name never appears in the files and never met Epstein that could be the most at risk?
Well, it's certainly a really interesting example of the difference in standards, or the difference in the political bar, I guess, for scandal in the UK versus scandal in the United States. Peter Mandelson, of course, is the person that he was referring to, the former ambassador for the UK to the United States under Prime Minister Starmer. He was relieved of his position after the revelations came out of his relationship with Epstein, and it's only gotten worse for him as more files have come out suggesting that he released or emailed Epstein some information that may have been market moving when they were friends more than a decade ago. All of that is to say, it's taken down not only Mandelson, but it's certainly having an impact on Starmer, and it's just not really having that same impact here on President Trump, even though, as I said repeatedly now, it remains a political thorn in his side. But this is also a president, I think I can say, having covered him for many years, who has a Teflon quality to him. There are lots of things that would take down other politicians, or at least hurt other politicians, that don't hurt President Trump. That's not to say this isn't hurting him, but it has not risen to the level of throwing his government into question in the way that it has in the UK for a man, as you rightly said, who himself never had a relationship with him at all.
It's been quite a contrast to witness today. Jeff, just quickly, with regard to policy, it looks like we're going to see a Department of Homeland Security shutdown on Friday night. Unless something magical happens here and there's a breakthrough with Democrats, will the president become directly involved in these negotiations over ICE restrictions, or is the White House staying out of this?
Well, that's always a question as to how involved any president will become in nitty-gritty negotiations like this. Certainly he's watching it, and certainly his people are involved because the DHS and the policies that DHS is putting forward and following through on are core to the promises that he made as a candidate and core to his presidency. So I can't say to what extent he's going to be making calls, but he's going to be watching it super closely, and his administration is absolutely invested in having a deal of some kind happen to prevent a shutdown. There are political ramifications that can be negative for both sides and both parties if that happens, but the Democrats are feeling a lot of confidence right now that they have a reason to push forward because of the outcry in the public on all sides of the political aisle to what has happened in Minnesota.
Jeff, thank you. Go warm up. Bloomberg's Jeff Mason reporting from a very cold White House North Lawn. It's great to have you, as always. Markets pushed higher again today as high tech continued to rebound from selling that we saw last week, pushing the Dow Industrial Average to another all-time high and the broad market near a record close. With more earnings on tap, along with some critical economic data this week, we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who's live at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Nora.
Hey, Joe. Well, quite the day on Wall Street. Of course, as you mentioned, we saw green all across the screen, at least as it relates to the three major indexes. We did see the S&P 500 closing just near a record high, up about 0.5%. But then also the Dow Jones Industrial Average hitting a record high. But all of this really driven by tech. That's what we've really had our eyes on today, as we did see the NASDAQ 100 ending higher by about 0.8%. A lot of those software stocks really reversing some of the losses that we did see from last week and pushing higher into the trading day at the close today. But I've also got my eyes on gold, because we did see gold topping that 5,000 level, which is really a key metric that a lot of investors have really been watching. But the U.S. dollar also sliding, losing about 0.6% on the day. And Bitcoin, which we know we had our eyes on just last week, due to all the volatility, we did see Bitcoin down for a second straight session, right now hanging around that $70,000 level.
Hims and Hers fell out of bed today. Nora, it has a lot to do with Novo in this lawsuit. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so Novo was taking out a lawsuit against Hims and Hers, which we know was a telehealth firm. They're essentially accusing the company of creating copycat medications, which we do know the company had released last week. We are seeing them kind of walking this back, but we are still seeing Novo Nordisk pulling out this lawsuit, despite the fact that we do know that Hims and Hers did actually pull back on their plans to actually push out a Wegovy drug, a pill that was a knockoff version of Novo Nordisk. But look at the share action. We are seeing Novo Nordisk shares up on the day, up by more than 3%. But take a look at Hims and Hers, and it was pretty brutal. The stock plunging for double-digit losses, down about 16%. That's the lowest level since 2024, Joe. But Eli Lilly, of course, we know to be a clear competitor to Novo Nordisk. We did see that stock down by more than 1%.
Interesting. So what's got your attention this week, Nora? I know we're starting to wind down a bit in the earnings department, but we still have some pretty big names like McDonald's and Coke and some big economic data. It's going to feel weird to have a Jobs Wednesday, isn't it?
Gonna feel weird to have a Jobs Wednesday, especially when we're used to it being on the first Friday of the month. But we do know that partial government shutdown is actually what pushed this back. So we will see the jobs report this Wednesday, but I've also got my eyes on retail sales data. That'll be coming out tomorrow as we continue to keep an eye on the consumer. You mentioned McDonald's earnings. So there's a lot of different things that we're looking at in the market as it pertains to the consumer. But as we wrap out the week on Friday, we'll also be getting that CPI inflation report, which will be key in terms of how investors think about positioning here in this market moving forward.
Yeah, great. Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda live in New York. And it's a Bloomberg exclusive. Regulators in China advising financial institutions to rein in their holdings of U.S. Treasuries, citing concerns over concentration risks, market volatility. The move is being framed around diversification rather than geopolitical tensions, but it raises significant questions about our economic relationship. And joining us now with her insights into this and more is Jennifer Welch, the chief geoeconomics analyst at Bloomberg Economics. Jenny, thanks for joining us. This has long been thought of as a doomsday scenario in the Treasury market. What's going on here?
I think we're not quite at doomsday.
Yeah?
I think we have to embed this in the broader context of especially China's holdings of U.S. Treasuries over time have been dipping, especially last year. And part of this reflects economic fundamentals, and part of it reflects broader strategic thinking in Beijing that they do want to reduce their vulnerabilities and exposure to U.S., especially sanctions risks, and especially following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. ability to demonstrate with Western parties to take advantage of those exposures. But we're not seeing a massive offloading of treasuries. We're seeing guidance that largely reflects what banks have already been doing over the past year.
Interesting. Is that diversification away from risk a real thing? What is actually driving these moves then for Beijing?
I think it's both a sense of market risk, which is reflected in other economies beyond China,
right,
about where U.S. policy might be headed in the future, but also from Beijing's perspective, geopolitical risk. It is concerned about having exposure to the United States that the U.S. could use as a weapon in the case of a major point of friction. You know, again, leveraging that example of what it learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Western sanctions.
Wow. So we've got a date on the calendar, or at least a week on the calendar. The first week of April, in fact, will be the meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi. I'm curious your thoughts on this, knowing that they were planning to meet in April, but what also might happen or not between now and then, because I'm assuming both sides will not want to disrupt this relationship too much.
It looks like both sides are trending towards having that meeting. Yeah. Certainly from Beijing's perspective, it's a home court advantage. They love being able to host U.S. presidents. President Trump will be the first one to visit since he went in his first term. Right. Yeah. And that's an opportunity for them to demonstrate their ability to kind of have international clout and bring leaders to them. It's also an opportunity to keep the trade relationship on an even keel, which is advantageous to their economy. But there's certainly friction points that could bubble up between now and then. We've seen, for example, in the call last week, Beijing's take on it seemed to be it was expressing frustrations over U.S. policy towards Taiwan. Right. We have the recent sentencing of a Hong Kong influential figure, Jimmy Lai, over the weekend. That's something that Donald Trump said he would personally lobby Beijing over. And then, of course, there's this recent move, as you mentioned, with the guidance to Chinese banks that if President Trump takes note of that, I could easily imagine him issuing a Truth Social, protesting the move.
Absolutely. $11 billion in arms sales to Taiwan. What will be President Xi's message on that when they're in the same room?
Well, I think he sent that message last week during their call, and it was one of strong disapproval. Beijing never likes U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. That's long been a point of contention. But this one was record-setting, $11 billion in one package. Now, What China tends to take the most frustration with is political moves, U.S. engagement with Taiwan, and signals of support for Taiwan. But this arms sale was really significant in its size and also in what it included. It includes capabilities that are very helpful for Taiwan.
Yeah, fascinating. When President Trump emerges from this meeting, will Jensen Huang get a phone call? Will we start seeing
Maybe he'll be on the plane.
He might be in the room. That's not a crazy idea, by the way, with this administration. Could that unlock the sale of these H-200s or maybe even a higher level AI chip?
Possibly even a higher level, right?
Yeah.
Before President Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping last year, this is pure speculation on my part, by the way, there was discussion of whether or not he might allow the Blackwell, right? Because he made some prior comments about that. This is NVIDIA's much more powerful chip. They didn't do that at the time when he met with Xi in South Korea. Could it be on the table this time around? Who knows? Certainly, usually for leader-level meetings, they like to offer some major deliverables. Since we already have a trade agreement in place, there's a question of what more would they do.
Really interesting. Now that NVIDIA is on to Rubin, maybe Blackwell could be next on that list. Jenny, great reporting, and thank you. Jennifer Welch, Bloomberg Economics, live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, we'll turn our attention back to Capitol Hill, the ongoing DHS funding battle, and the prospect of another partial shutdown this weekend when we speak with Republican Congressman Troy Downing of Montana. He's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Our position has been clear. Dramatic changes are needed at the Department of Homeland Security before a DHS funding bill moves forward. Period. Full stop.
We're asking ICE to do nothing more than follow the standards that the vast majority of law enforcement agencies already follow. Why should ICE be different, especially when they have such a record of brutality?
Doesn't sound like we're getting any closer to a deal. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. That, of course, Democratic leaders Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer within just the last hour, laying out the state of play here in Washington with just a little under 5 days to go before a DHS shutdown, with both parties still far apart on any sort of deal surrounding ICE restrictions to avert closure. Senator Schumer confirming that Senate Democrats sent a bill text Saturday for a full year of DHS funding that includes codifying Democrats' demands for immigration enforcement guardrails. We've talked about a lot of them, from demasking to body cameras. Republicans are uncommitted in the Senate here as House GOP lawmakers hone in on the Save America Act this week, being pushed by the Trump White House and Republican leadership in an effort to take on their claims of voter fraud. Joining us now with his perspective on all of this from Capitol Hill, Republican Congressman Troy Downing of Montana, serves on both the House Financial Services Committee, the House Small Business Committee. Congressman, it's good to see you. I'm going to ask you about the Housing for the 21st Century Act in a moment, because there are some important things happening today. I'm wondering, first, though, if you can give us a sense of what's going to happen Friday. It doesn't sound like we're near a breakthrough here. Will it be a shutdown for DHS or maybe a continuing resolution?
You know, that's obviously the big question, and I've been speaking with my colleagues in the other chamber about this as well. But Schumer and Jeffries are pushing this narrative that has been completely blown out of proportion, and I don't think that they're negotiating in good faith. Some of the things that they're asking on reforms with ICE are just not reasonable given what they're seeing right now. And I think one of the hardest ones, and any normal person can understand this right now. Obviously, there are a lot of protests. Some of these are angry. Some of them, turned violent. Mm-hmm. And the real issue with the request to unmask our law enforcement agents out there is the very, very real risk that they're identified by bad actors in these groups, that they're doxxed, that they post their addresses, and pretty soon you've got protesters or worse in front of these law enforcement agents, homes, families, children. And it's incredibly dangerous. And the fact that they're asking for that, I think, is crazy, given what we're seeing happen right now with these folks trying to interfere with federal law enforcement, trying to carry out their duties of protecting the public. And I think that one there is going to be a non-starter. Some of the other ones, I think, are interesting because I think you have bipartisan buy-in, like body cams. I think everybody would like to see that because it gives that perspective of what's actually happening. It gives another camera angle, not just from one side or the other. But I hear some of the requests that they have there is changing it so that they're not just always on, and they're turning these off when these cameras are pointed at protesters. And I think that's a weird argument because you're not getting a whole story. And I'm not sure why they're worried about telling the whole story. I mean, the truth will set you free. Let them show the whole story, which is the truth. So the short answer to your question is I think there's a lot of distance between the demands on reforms and how ICE are doing their business and what we're willing to do, because we want law and order, we want public safety, and we want the safety of our law enforcement officers. And some of this puts that at risk.
Yeah, well, and I've heard that argument about doxing and identifying a number of times. This is, to your point, you reached right for it, the heart of the debate. We've had a lot of folks, though, ask Congressman, why is it different for any other law enforcement? A police officer cannot pull me over and not show his face and not identify himself. Is that risk specific to ICE agents? Why are they being held to a different standard?
I think it is because we don't have. Well, here's the question I've been asking. How has it become reasonable to have, I'll say, protesters, sometimes this goes beyond simply protesting, but having folks that actually try to put themselves in the way of federal law enforcement doing their jobs? ICE is federal law enforcement. Yeah. And let's just put this in perspective. If you had some law enforcement going after a serial killer, you wouldn't have signal chats of people saying where they were working, try to block their access to the building. You wouldn't have people blowing whistles, calling them names, yelling at them from across the street. It just wouldn't happen. So to answer your question, the reason it's different is because these protesters have pushed that boundary of saying when and where law enforcement is trying to do their job, and they're out there with cameras trying to not just on their own accord, but Governor Walz, encouraged them to all, just be there and start doing this so they can record what's going on and hopefully find somebody so that they can post who these people are. And I think that this is really, I think it is specific to your question, to this line of law enforcement, because it's become so loud. And I think one of the things that we need to do, on both sides is try to bring the temperature down on all of this, make sure that we're de-escalating to the point we can so that we don't have folks that are so comfortable trying to interfere with law enforcement doing their jobs.
Well, I hate to say this, I've only got about a minute here, so I want to use our time as responsibly as I can. Before I ask you about this vote tonight, Congressman, is 2 weeks enough for a CR if that's what it comes to, or do you need more time?
I think it can if calm heads prevail. And I think this is what it's going to come down to. ICE is going to be funded. We got funding through, through the one big beautiful bill. So the real question is whether the
TSA is where you're reaching, right?
TSA, FEMA, there's so much else that falls under Department of Homeland Security. And let's see if they're willing to shut all that down. I hope they're not. It's not good for them. It's not good for us. It's not good for the American people.
I've only got 30 seconds. If Housing for the 21st Century Act passes the House, when does it result in new home building?
Well, that's one of the American dream. Home ownership is a big part of that, and we need to get the government out of the way. We need to make sure we're not limiting the supply of housing. I do believe that this is going to pass on suspension tonight here in about an hour or so, and hopefully the Senate takes it up quickly because this is a problem. It's bipartisan. Everybody agrees this needs to be solved. So I think Montana will pass and get into law.
Talk to us after the vote. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington with breaking news from the nation's capital. The two members of Congress who forced the discharge petition to release the Epstein files, Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Tom Massie, have just emerged from the Department of Justice, where they've been able to review unredacted Epstein files. They're talking to reporters now. Let's listen live on Bloomberg.
Our bigger concern is that there's still a lot that's redacted. Even in what we're seeing redacted versions. I thought we were supposed to see the unredacted versions. And that's because the documents produced to justice from the FBI, from the grand jury, was redacted when they got it. So we kept doing the searches for the unredacted information. It's the identical redactions that they have. Now, I don't think that's nefarious on the career attorneys that were reviewing it, but they obviously haven't gotten the production because our law says that the FBI and the original grand jury needs to be unredacted.
Right. The U.S. attorneys and the FBI are compelled, as well as the DOJ. And the DOJ was responsible for this document production. And they just produced documents that have been given to them from the FBI, the 302 forms, for instance, which need to be unredacted. There was one other thing that definitely needs to be addressed. Some of these files have been taken down, like the DOJ produced them, and for some reason they took them down. Maybe they decided that victims' names were in there and that they needed further redactions. But those documents not only haven't been put back up on the site with the appropriate redactions, they were not available to us to search. As far as I could tell, we couldn't search the documents that had been taken off the internet.
Can you share with us the name of the 6 men that you identified?
I probably should do that from the floor or in a committee hearing.
And look, they should be releasing these documents. We have many avenues where we can compel that legally. Maybe they've done it out of oversight. I don't know. I don't believe that. But, you know, they should be releasing those documents. And our hope is to get them to do that. And then in some of the redactions, they need to be very careful in whether that was a survivor or not. Just because, for example, someone is female doesn't necessarily mean they're survivors. And it seemed like they blanket redacted anyone who was a female from my review.
Yeah, I would like to give the DOJ a chance to say they made a mistake and over-redacted and let them unredact those men's names. That would probably be the best way to do it.
So how much of the redactions, you said that there are a lot of, the documents, some of what you saw in there had redactions. How much new information then did you see that was unredacted, or did it look pretty similar to what we've seen publicly?
I mean, what we're after is the men who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked women to. We want those names published. We're not out to embarrass people. And the problem is we went in there hoping to see that in 302 forms. What we found out is those 302 forms were redacted before they got to the DOJ. But our legislation directs the FBI, which is the agency that produced those 302 forms, to also produce these documents. The Attorney General is ultimately responsible for that production, so that's why we're here at the DOJ to view these files. But there needs to be more information given in those 302s. So I was disappointed we didn't find that. But it's also clear, just sort of as a checking their homework, that they need to do a little more homework. There are 6 men. We went in there for 2 hours. There's millions of files, right? And in a couple of hours, we found 6 men whose names have been redacted who are implicated in the way that the files are presented.
What's your message to Pam Bondi after what you saw today?
Listening to a live conversation with Congressman Tom Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, and California Democrat Ro Khanna. They've just emerged from the Department of Justice, having expected to see unredacted documents from the trove of Epstein files, some 3 million files that have so far been released, realizing there are others unreleased. The difference here was that they were to be put in a private room, as Jamie Raskin experienced earlier, with no electronic devices, to review unredacted files. And what we're hearing from Khanna and Massie now is that they were still redacted. Joining us now with her legal insight is Sarah Krissoff, former federal prosecutor with the Southern District of New York, now partner at Cozen O'Connor. It's great to have you back with us. What do you make of this, Sarah? If the Department of Justice was responsible for the documents then? Did they violate the law again in not going to the source for the unredacted version?
Yeah, this seems like a mistake. I mean, the FBI is part of the Department of Justice, right? These are not separate entities. The FBI is under the Department of Justice. Those unredacted 302s were surely in the FBI's possession and could have been produced by the Department of Justice here. And I've said from the beginning, the 302s are really the roadmap to this whole investigation. We've got sort of loads and loads of documents, but the 302s are really key. And so having those, either fully or very partially redacted is a problem here.
Do you suspect that the DOJ, based on the law, will then provide the unredacted documents to members of Congress? They have a lot of power over the way this is going to go. Is this some sort of slow rolling tactic by the department?
Yeah, under my reading of the law, they are required to really explain any redactions they have done. They need to categorize those redactions, and there's very limited reasons they can redact documents. They cannot do it just to protect someone's reputation or protect them from inquiry here. That is not a valid basis for redaction under the law. So I think the DOJ is going to have to go back. They're going to have to take a hard look at these redactions and figure out what the next step here. I mean, this was the check that Congress had put in place to ensure that any redactions were appropriate. And what we're seeing so far is that, we see these representatives calling out the DOJ and saying, hey, these aren't redacted in the way they're supposed to be.
Sarah, I mentioned Congressman Jamie Raskin, who emphasized when he spoke with reporters, there are only 4 computers at this DOJ annex office where they're allowed to view the files without a phone or a digital device. He said in the span of a few hours, he was only to review dozens of millions of files. Is this going to take years?
Yeah, this is a really massive process, right? I mean, it's sort of, if you think about the scope of the investigative documents here and sort of in who's looking at them, how do you put them together? How do you assess it? Because any case is really sort of little tidbits of information from different sources put together to paint a full picture. There's going to be no one document, no one communication that really puts the whole story together. Sort of the best roadmap, as I said, is really those 302s, because those are reports generally of interviews and other key happenings in the investigation. But it is really a laborious and tedious process to sort of analyze these documents and figure out how they piece together.
We heard from Ghislaine Maxwell today, but only her Fifth Amendment right was invoked. She did not answer any of the questions from the House Oversight Committee in what was a virtual deposition. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. But her lawyer made the point that only Ghislaine Maxwell could get Donald Trump and Bill Clinton off the hook, can say credibly that there was no wrongdoing in their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And, of course, the only way she said she's going to do that is with a presidential pardon. You think that's what comes next?
Yeah, I mean, that was very clear bargaining going on. I mean, her lawyer is doing a very good job of advocating for her and making it very clear that she will sort of provide that information if she's provided clemency. I sort of disagree with the notion that she is the one that can clear them. She is the one that can provide this credible information, right? She is a convicted sex offender. She is in custody for a long time. She has a lot of incentives here to provide certain information and not provide other information. So whether or not her information is credible is an entirely different question, but her lawyers are certainly doing a good job advocating for her to try to get some sort of clemency for her.
It's good to have you back, Sarah. I appreciate it. Sarah Krissoff is former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. We thank you, as always. Air Canada is cutting off all flights to Cuba as the country grows dangerously close to running out of fuel. Aviation fuel. This after President Trump threatened tariffs on any country providing Cuba with oil. And the Cuban government is now warning international airlines will not be able to refuel at its main airport in Havana for the next month. That's why Air Canada is sending empty planes there now to bring home the nearly 3,000 vacationers who are still on the island. And joining us now, details. Bloomberg's Alex Vasquez, who is live in our Mexico City bureau. Alex, thank you for joining us. How long can Cuba exist with this oil embargo in place?
Well, it's hard to tell, but this is a really bad news for Cuba. I mean, just between Mexico and Venezuela, both countries sent around 80% of Cuba imports of oil. So the situation can get pretty worse pretty soon. This was the first time that President Sheinbaum confirmed that they're not sending oil. She also said that they will find a way, they will try to find a diplomatic way to continue sending fuel. But our colleague, Lucia Casay, was the first one to report that Pemex, the Mexican state oil company, halted some oil shipments to the island. But today we got the confirmation that it's not happening anymore. So this is serious. Mexico used to send around 20,000 barrels of oil per day to Cuba, and that was enough for 1 month demand of gasoline. So yeah, things could get pretty worse very quickly.
You're referring to our reporting that Mexico has halted its oil shipments to Cuba because of the president's tariff threat. Alex, are there any other sources that Cuba can draw on?
I mean, honestly, we have a pretty delicate situation with Russia and the war with Ukraine. So I don't think they're getting enough help. I know Cuba has some capacity, but our colleague Jimena Zúñiga just reported that nighttime luminosity in Cuba has fell around 22% in January compared with the same month a year ago. So yeah, there's a lot of shortages right now. The main one, electricity, but also water. And, you know, this was the first time President Sheinbaum actually confronted Trump and said she completely disagreed with this measure, with this threat of tariff, that she was going to find another way. But so far she's complying, like she did in the past with other requests from Trump, like sending National Guards to the border to stop migration, or sending, you know, criminals related with drug cartels to the U.S. So we are not expecting Mexico to resume exports of oil anytime soon, and we don't think Cuba has another source after the capture of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela.
Okay, Alex. Bloomberg's Alex Vasquez with us live from Mexico City. Thank you. More coming up on what we're learning from the bipartisan lawmakers who just emerged from the Department of Justice, having reviewed the Epstein files. They did not see what they expected. Our political panel will be up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
What I saw that bothered me were the names of at least 6 men that have been redacted that are likely incriminated by their inclusion in these files. So that's the first thing that I saw. It took some digging to find them. Then I'll let you talk about what you saw.
Well, and we discussed that. I mean, there are 6 men, some of them with their photographs, that have been redacted, and there's no explanation why those people were redacted.
Congressman Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, Republican and Democrat, just moments ago, reacting to their review of Epstein files at the Department of Justice. The two lawmakers emerging after spending a couple hours reviewing documents and clearly dissatisfied with the number of redactions, knowing that they were supposed to be reviewing unredacted files. That's why no electronic devices were allowed in this annex set aside for this very purpose. Joining us now with their reaction to these developments, our political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Republican strategist and partner at Stone Court Capital, and Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. There you have it, Rick. These are the 2 men responsible for the release of these files by way of a discharge petition. They're still not getting what they have been asked to or demanded to be presented through a law. The DOJ is in violation of a law. Was this a mistake, or are they slow rolling this process?
Yeah, DOJ has been in violation of law for over a month and a half, right? And that's the nicest Tom Massey and Ro Khanna have been toward this administration since this whole affair started. I mean, they've been pummeling the DOJ to get these documents, and the fact that they were afforded this opportunity to go see them, see the unredacted versions, and then found a bunch of redacted versions. And we're willing to accept this idea that somehow FBI didn't know maybe that they had to be unredacted and the DOJ never really checked on it. I don't think they should be giving the administration a whole lot of credit for just making mistakes. This is a law. The American people have a right to see this information by law. And DOJ is in violation of that law, and FBI is a part of the DOJ.
That's correct.
So, what are they missing here?
So they really just kind of had to go downstairs and ask. So, Jeannie, how long until we start hearing the word cover-up?
Oh, I think we're already hearing it. I think this just sort of confirms a belief, true or not, that many people have had about this whole affair, which is that there's a two-tier system of justice. The last release, we had victims, photographs and names put out for the world to see, and yet the perpetrators or people who may have been perpetrators or at least friendly with Jeffrey Epstein, their names, their likenesses were redacted. And this is just another in a long story about this Epstein file. And, we talked a little bit about what's going on overseas. You just talked about it, Joe, in England. This thing has broken through in a big way when you've got an ad in the Super Bowl by victims and everybody watching knows what they're talking about. And you've got Princess Kate and Prince William coming out today to make a statement about this. This thing has broken through. It is not going away. And it's stunning to me that the administration, the DOJ, the FBI, don't just do what they're supposed to do and move on. This drip is really politically and strategically the worst thing they could be doing for themselves, let alone the victims.
The contrast between the U.S. and the U.K. is remarkable. Listen to Nigel Farage from earlier today at a rally.
The Scottish leader, Anna Sarwar, has called on him to go. The cabinet are coming out one by one being loyal, because none of them want to appear to be the person that wields the knife. And he has to meet the backbench Labour Party at 6 p.m. this evening, where I expect the conversation will be of a rather franker nature. He won't be there for long. He'll be gone and replaced by somebody undoubtedly far worse.
Now, that's, of course, the view of the leader of the Reform UK. Rick, does this just demonstrate the difference between our cultures and our politics? The fact that Keir Starmer, who is not in the Epstein files and never met Jeffrey Epstein, is at risk somehow of losing his political career because of the people he hired, whereas you see Howard Lutnick and others in the White House going to work every day.
Yeah, look, I mean, forget Howard Lutnick. This is the president.
Yeah.
He's the one with a long-standing relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, right? Within his administration, he has the longest, closest relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And if it's a political issue in Britain, it for sure will become a political issue here. And I don't know what the Democratic Party's strategy is around this. It's kind of hard to tell with all these various moving parts. I mean, you imagine this. I mean, we have the president and Hillary Clinton going to testify in Congress. We had these two members of Congress today go to the Justice Department to look at records that have been covered up. And we have a president who keeps saying, don't look in this direction. There's nothing to see. So, I don't know about you, but I think there's, they're all making it more interesting than it probably really is. Wow, and so at some point, I think the electorate's going to fight back.
Well, it doesn't help relationships on Capitol Hill, certainly at this moment, Jeannie. And we've got some other issues to deal with there as well. With, 5 days until the government shuts down, I guess less at this point with the Department of Homeland Security specifically shutting down Friday if we can't figure out some kind of a breakthrough on ICE. We talked to another Republican lawmaker this hour who made it very clear Democrats and Republicans are so far apart. Do we shut down or do we have a continuing resolution on Friday night?
Yeah, I think we're headed for a shutdown. It's hard to predict in this Congress. So much of what has happened in this space has been a reaction to what's happening on the ground. So God forbid there is another horrific incident involving ICE that could change everything. But I think right now you have two sides that have both gone to their respective corners. They don't seem to be even talking, let alone making or thinking about making any deals. I think one thing that might make sense for the Democrats, at least from my perspective, would be to carve out ICE to try to pass the rest of the DHS bill, if possible, and then, or at least on a continuing resolution, and then to just refuse to fund ICE. I don't think there is a sense they want to do that. There's a sense that they have more leverage if they keep this together, and that may be true. But to your point, Joe, I think we are headed either towards a CR, but if you don't do that tomorrow or the next day, we're going to see another partial shutdown.
Another partial shutdown, another mini shutdown? Are we talking about something of enormous length? How do we get out of this?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, one thing's got clear. ICE is funded for the next 5 years.
That's right.
There's no leverage in having a debate about ICE funding because they're done. You know, the big, beautiful bill funded them in an extraordinary level, right? 5 times their normal budget up front. So they're sitting pretty. The rest of Homeland Defense has to actually go get funded. And that's where the Democrats have their leverage. If they're willing to stand up and say, we're not going to fund FEMA, we're not going to fund TSA, we're not going to fund the Coast Guard, then that's on them, right? That's leverage they have that may or may not play politically. That's their estimate. I actually think this is much to do about nothing. I mean, like these 10 guardrails that the Democrats have put out and said, we need to have this, are all negotiable. And Republicans I've talked to have said, yeah, I could go for, 2, 3, 4 of them. Okay. And so I really think there's a deal to be made. It's just that, like, nobody seems to want to make a deal.
Yes.
Well, the Republicans are perfectly happy with the Democrats' strategy. Democrats think they can make up ground on this strategy. And the president's more than willing to let everybody sort of do their own thing.
Wow.
So up until time when the parties all think they have something at stake, that's when a deal can get done.
We've just got about a minute left, Jeannie. It's been clear that demasking is a non-starter for Republicans. Is anything short of that acceptable to Democrats?
I don't think so. I think that they are hell-bent on putting these restrictions forward. And, the $16 billion I was talking about, 10 for ICE, 6 for border control, they can have a little control over that. But masking is a big deal, and I think they're going to simply ask, why is every other law enforcement official in this country demasked except for this federal force? And let Republicans answer that.
If there is a CR in our remaining 30 seconds, is it a couple of weeks or much longer? What could they carve out?
I think they'll just keep kicking the can, trying to keep heat on the negotiations, because they would like to get it over with, right? But maybe it does get to the point where if they can't agree, then maybe they can agree on a CR that goes for the rest of the budget year. Remember, we've already burned 5 months out of a 12-month budget. So,
Yes,
with all due respect, I mean, to the government and their well-oiled machine, something's got to be done now.
Closest we've gotten a regular order in some time, though, I think, right? Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, thank you both so much. Here's something to look forward to tomorrow. The return of Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lines. Yes, after 6 months at this desk. It'll happen. In the meantime, check out the Washington Edition newsletter. And I'll see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power, along with Kayleigh on Bloomberg TV and radio.